Professor Barbara Neis of the Department of Sociology at Memorial University of Newfoundland. Barbara Neis is a groundbreaking contributions to research and knowledge mobilization on the social and environmental issues facing coastal communities, which has won worldwide impact. She has helped explain why fish stocks collapse, shown how fishermen's ecological knowledge can inform science and coastal governance, advanced understanding of gender in the fisheries, carried out community-engaged research on marine and coastal occupational health, and is now studying the consequences of extended commuting for work. Professor Neis.
Thank you very much. Are you still awake? They put the person who came the furthest and is the most jet-lagged last in this program. It's a great honor to be here, and it's really a great honor to be here with you. I'm extremely impressed by the company I'm keeping. And it's also, I think, a great honor to be joining the Royal Society, I think at a time when in this country we desperately need a Royal Society, particularly an Academy of Social Sciences. We basically have a government and a lot of people who basically continue to insist that there is no such thing as social science. I began my career working in the field of historical sociology with a particular focus on social movements. I studied the Fishermen's Protective Union, a major Newfoundland and Labrador social movement with 20,000 members that held the balance of power in the Newfoundland government in the early part of the 20th century. The focus of that research was the role of social power dynamics in confining the movement to the northeast coast of the country. Its regional base limited the capacity of the movement to achieve an enduring set of fishery and other reforms that could have changed the industry and its legacy for rural people and for Newfoundland. I moved away from research on social movements, but continued to use an historical approach to understanding social phenomena and to build, in many cases, attention to social power into my analyses. Most recently, I've co-authored a manuscript with a former doctoral student, Ahmed Khan, that uses an analysis of the pre- and post-fishery collapse in the northern Gulf of St. Lawrence to illustrate how an adaptation of Gaventa's multidimensional power cube can be used to devise a power analysis that incorporates not only social but also ecological elements into our understanding of how our power works. My doctoral work sought to explore a major crisis in the Newfoundland and Labrador fisheries that manifested in the early 1980s. At that time, the big vertically integrated companies were on the verge of bankruptcy, leading to government intervention to consolidate ownership and bail them out. My focus here was on understanding what triggered the crisis of accumulation within the vertically integrated sector, and to use that to evaluate the steps taken by industry and government to address that crisis. It was during my doctoral research that I began studying issues related to gender in fisheries and occupational health issues within fishing and seafood processing. My interest in gender arose from my efforts to understand why a protest line established to prevent the closure of the Burin fish plant in the midst of this crisis was a women's institution. Why were almost all of the participants in the protest line the wives and primarily women family members of the fish plant workers and not the people in the industry themselves? I continued working on gender in fisheries for almost 20 years, including organizing in collaboration with the International Collective in Support of Fish Workers, a SHIRC-funded network of researchers and representatives of women in fisheries from many countries. That network generated the first edited collection on gender globalization in fisheries called Changing Tides, and a linked prize-winning documentary film. While doing field research for my doctorate in the early 1980s, I learned that some trawlermen were being seriously injured while fishing in a government-subsidized effort to encourage deep-sea fishing companies to send their vessels north to fish in the ice, to essentially establish sovereignty off the Labrador coast. The vessels were not designed for fishing in ice, and the steps workers were taking to allow them to do so were resulting in serious injuries. This information led me to establish an informal research group and to apply for funding for the first major study on the social impact of technological change in the deep-sea fishery, including its impacts on health and safety. After that study was completed, I was asked by the Women's Committee of the Union to carry out a study on repetitive strain injuries in processing. And in 1991, I took my first sabbatical in Quebec and met with Karen Messing, an expert on women's occupational health at UQuam. This led to us co-editing a book on this subject, in which I published the first of a series of primarily co-authored papers on occupational allergy and asthma to shellfish, the most recent of which came out in 2012. This research was triggered by a chance conversation with a former plant manager in an airport who described her experience trying to find out what was making the workers in her plant collapse, and developed eventually into a major 3-year study and related spin-off research and knowledge transfer in which I played a leading role. The most recent paper in the series was co-written with Dana House and Mohammed Jibe. Mohammed is an occupational physician who's done related work in South Africa, and this paper looks at the political economy of occupational asthma and allergy and seafood processing in Newfoundland and Labrador in South Africa. I co-founded and have co-directed for much of its history the Safety Net Center for Research in Occupational Health and Safety at Memorial, the first such center in Canada east of Quebec. This was originally funded through a CIHR Community Alliance for Health Research grant, but now has core funding, thank God, and we never know how long it's going to last, from Memorial. As part of my involvement with that center, I've engaged not only in research on shellfish occupational allergy and asthma, but fishing safety, styrene exposures in the boat building industry, occupational health and safety risks in aquaculture, safety on fishing wharves, and a number of other issues. And I'm currently developing a study on climate change-related extreme events and fishing and harbor safety, funded through the NCE MAOPAR, and am part of a new SSHRC-funded project on work disability policy. And Stephen Bornstein and I co-edited a special issue of Policy and Practice in Health and Safety that's based on not only the Safety Net research findings, but on the community-engaged approach to health and safety research that we've developed. During the late 1980s, I lived in the community of Petty Harbour. Fishermen and others in this region were among the first to challenge scientific assessments of northern cod in the late 1980s. When these and other stocks later collapsed, resulting in a series of moratoria and roughly 40,000 layoffs in the Atlantic Canadian fishery, I began research that sought to understand what made these and other small-scale fishermen question the stock assessment science, and through establishing the Newfoundland Inshore Fisheries Association, to launch the first formal critical evaluation of that science. This research was the start of another series of research projects, collaborations, and publications. Am I running out of time? Okay. Seeking to develop and apply a systematic method for documenting fishermen's ecological knowledge and comparing it with stock assessment science to assess the strengths and weaknesses of each and ways to promote our understanding of fisheries dynamics. In a paper on why fish stocks collapse, we described a multidimensional process of intensification and expansion in these fisheries, largely missed by stock assessment science, in part because of disciplinary boundaries disconnecting social and natural science. The methodology we developed for gathering fishermen's ecological knowledge and comparing it with science has been adapted and refined for use in research in Norway, South Africa, Ireland, and elsewhere, and there's now a large and diverse literature in this field. In recent years, I've been trying to understand, along with others, why it's so challenging to rebuild collapsed fisheries and threatened communities. And we recently ran an international symposium looking at that. And finally, while doing research on Newfoundland's west coast, I began to realize that in many cases, the people living in these communities, who I thought I was working on behalf of, a lot of them were still maintaining homes in those communities, but they weren't working there anymore. This and other evidence of widespread commuting in the region triggered discussions within Safety Net and with collaborating researchers in Nova Scotia about extended commuting for work and its potential consequences, positive and negative, for workers and their families, employers, and home and host communities. And so I'm now running a 7-year partnership grant called the On the Move Partnership that is a Canadian-wide study of what we call the spectrum of mobility, everything from extended daily commuting of up to 3 hours right through to international commuting, and including in that study temporary foreign workers. So for most of my career, I've done collaborative research, working with teams of researchers from a broad range of disciplines, and working closely with community partner organizations from whom I've learned a lot about researchable problems and much more. Given this background, I cannot accept an honor like election to the Royal Society without acknowledging the collaborators, students, and postdoctoral fellows, mentors, and the many other individuals and groups, including fishermen, plant workers, community leaders, and project and safety net staff, without whose support and engagement the work I've described would not have been possible. Thank you.
So I would like to express warm thanks to all the new fellows, and I invite you to pay strong attention to the position to be filled and to all the invitation you will receive in the forthcoming years to participate to the different committees and all kind of requests we will propose. For example, the expert panel and many other committees and invitations. Et je voudrais terminer en vous invitant, si vous en avez l'occasion, à participer à la prochaine réunion annuelle de la Société qui aura lieu au Château Frontenac à Québec le 20 et 21 novembre 2014. And again, I would like to express warm thanks for the sponsorship to the University of Calgary. So have a nice evening. Bonne soirée.